get started. Get all of everything going in the right order. All right, we're almost ready. About 30 seconds. All right, welcome, and I hope everybody is having a great evening. On behalf of the Michigan Center for Civic Education, we want to welcome all of those watching live and that will see this recording a little bit later for our inaugural season called Community Conversations. My name is Ellen Zwarnstein. I serve as the Executive Director at the Michigan Center for Civic Education, which is Michigan's dedicated nonprofit organization for K through 12 civic education programs, along with teacher professional development and learning opportunities. In addition to tonight's event, we sponsor a series of student-facing programs, including We the People, Mock Trial, Project Citizen, and navigating challenging and meaningful conversations in the classroom. All of those programs, we're proud to say, have a lot of research behind them, demonstrating their long-term impact on students really starting to see themselves as part of civic community, and also opening up gateways to higher education in various fields that really encourage a sense of civic belonging, civic identity, and cultivating civic knowledge. We would also like to recognize Glenn Ellen Lemberg, who is here, who is helping to coordinate this series of events, and also the generosity of Warner, Norcross, and Judd for underwriting this particular series. The purpose of our community conversations serves to bridge the gap between the K through 12 communities and the larger civil, legal, and political communities as well. It is through the personal and the professional stories that provide these pathways where current students, future students will begin to really see themselves as part of the fabric of civil society and be part of these healthy and productive, inclusive communities. Tonight, we will focus on these stories and reflections and the analysis behind the educational, the workforce, and development work through a public policy lens, from the local to the international. March does provide us a context of women's history, and with the recent election in the United States, a compelling story of representation and visibility. Tonight's speakers will dig a little bit deeper to explore and reveal the limits and the possibilities of representation and visibility in order to piece together a greater future. Questions about representation, systems of power, social justice remain front and center. And our two speakers will bridge the local and the international, revealing the impact of public policy on our lives. A few notes on tonight's process. We will keep the chat open. So if anybody would like to put some comments in the chat, you are more than welcome to. Glenn Ellen, Ernsti, and myself will all be looking at the chat in order to cultivate questions to provide to the panelists. And we will have a moderator, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Ernsti Augustine, who has significant experience of her own to add into this field and will also serve as tonight's moderator. Attorney Augustine serves on the board of directors at the Michigan Center for Civic Education and practices law in East Lansing, Michigan. She moved from Florida to Michigan, and we couldn't be happier that she has chosen to make Michigan her home. She has her bachelor's and her master's degree in political science and human development, respectively, and is also her JD, all of those from Michigan State University. Active in her community, Ms. Augustine serves in the Davis-Dunnings Bar Association, the Ingham County Young Lawyers section. She's a member of the Greater Lansing Estate Planning Council, a member of MSU's Inn of Court, and so much more. Most importantly, Ms. Augustine is kind, generous, and believes in providing the educational opportunities for all of our students and ongoing professional learning for all those in our legal communities. As I turn it over to Ms. Augustine, who will then introduce the panelists and moderate the conversation, I'd like to say thank you to Ms. Augustine and to the panelists for your time, your expertise, and your kindness. And with that, we turn it over to Ms. Augustine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to serve this evening. Good evening, everyone. As Ellen mentioned, I'm an attorney at Children and Tripp Law Offices. I practice at a probate estate planning and a law firm. And I'm glad to introduce our panelists this evening. Our first panelist is Brandy Johnson. Just to give you a little background on Ms. Johnson. Before joining Governor Whitmer's administration as Education Policy Advisor in March 2019, Ms. Johnson served as the founder and executive director of the Michigan College Access Network. At MCAN, Ms. Johnson began to build Michigan's college access movement and worked to coordinate policy and programming to increase Michigan's college readiness, enrollment, and completion rates. Between 2008 and 2010, she served in the office of Governor Granholm as College Access Coordinator. Ms. Johnson is from Arizona. She is a first college generation student and earned her bachelor's degree from Arizona State University before relocating to Michigan in 2007 to pursue her master's in public policy from the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. She also taught in the Teach for America Corps as a third grade teacher in Las Vegas. In 2013, she was named the Michigan Champion for Children by the Michigan Association of School Administrators. In 2014, she received the National College Access Network's Executive Leader of Excellence Award. And in 2017, she was awarded the Centennial Award for Excellence by the American Association of College Registrars and Admissions Officers. Ms. Johnson, her spouse, and 2 children live in East Lansing, Michigan. Very impressive background, Ms. Johnson, and dedicating your time to many youth in education. And we thank you for your insight and wisdom, and we look forward to hearing from you this evening.
Thanks so much. So I'll just say a few words. Thanks so much for that kind introduction. As Ernestine mentioned, my name's Brandy, and I'm the Governor's Education Policy Advisor. And in this role, I advise Governor Whitmer on all issues related to both K-12 education, higher education, as well as workforce development. As you could probably tell by my introduction, I'm particularly passionate about paving the way for Michiganders to pursue post-secondary education. And that's really what motivated me to join the governor's administration. The governor, in her very first State of the State address in 2019, set a very bold post-secondary goal to increase the percentage of Michiganders with a college degree or post-secondary certificate to 60% by the year 2030. Right now, we're at, well, when we started the administration, we're at 45% of Michiganders have a post-secondary credential. We're now up to just over 49%, which is really great progress. But without accelerating the trajectory of that increase, we won't meet our goal. And we know that a high school diploma, just as your terminal credential, simply isn't enough to compete in the 21st century economy, and that functionally all adults need post-secondary education in order to compete in today's labor market. And so that's really the work that motivates me and you know, what I've been focusing on in my role as the governor's policy advisor. Obviously, COVID-19 has has really changed my role considerably. Over the last year, I've worked extremely closely with our schools, colleges, and universities to implement, well, initially to close last spring, and then develop and implement mitigation protocols to make sure that they can continue to operate safely for students and families. And so a big part of my role now is serving as a liaison between the governor and our schools and colleges and universities. It is truly an honor to serve this governor. As was mentioned, I also served in the Granholm administration, and actually in my home state of Arizona, I once interned for the governor there, Janet Napolitano. So in my career, I've worked for three very bold Democratic female governors. And it has certainly taught me a lot about leadership and really helped to develop my leadership style. In between the Granholm administration and the Whitmer administration, I started my own nonprofit organization called the Michigan College Access Network, where I led the growth of a statewide nonprofit to focus on increasing college readiness, enrollment, persistence, and completion, so that so I can speak as a leader of a female run organization as well. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about some of the governor's policy work as it relates to gender parity and supporting women, particularly as it relates to economic opportunity. But wanted to give a chance for my co-panelists to say a few words of introduction before we get started.
Absolutely. I can introduce our next panelist, Dr. Sujyoti Dasgupta. Dr. Dasgupta completed her doctoral studies from School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. She received the Felix Scholarship to conduct her doctoral research. Her 2019 book, Class, Politics, and Agrarian Policies in Post-Liberalization, India, explores her interests in social justice, political economy, public policy, and more. Her current project is entitled Making Ends Meet, Women's Social Capital Development in Regional Informal Economies, which studies women work participation in the informal economy of Michigan. Trained in political science, she shifted to the development studies. Her core interest is to contribute towards combining theory and practice for a better understanding of social science. After receiving her PhD, she joined Tata Institute of Social Sciences, India, as an assistant professor serving as the academic coordinator for Masters in Development Practice. She has worked in the development sector in India and has editorial experience. She completed her master's and MPhil from, and you may want to help me out on pronouncing this, but Johari Nehru University in Political Studies in 2008. Dr. Dasgupta now teaches at James Madison College at Michigan State University in the Comparative Cultures and Politics major. Welcome, Dr. Dasgupta. Your background is very impressive for you to be working in two different worlds, it seemed like, and we look forward to hearing your presentation this evening as well.
Thank you so much, Ms. Augustine. I think you did a fabulous job of pronouncing my name. Yeah, those are very like tongue twisters, but you know, what can I say? We live in a global world and we all have to learn each other's ways. So I do have a few thoughts that I would want to share before we go into the questions. Hopefully I don't overstep time. If I do, you can always give me a signal and I will cut short at that moment. As somebody who has worked in the development sector and has also taught now for more than 6 years, you know, I am quite passionate about issues of social justice, and therefore I thought I will bring up two central concepts that we associate with social justice today, to kind of map where are we in terms of gender justice and where are we headed, or what are some more things that we need to think about. So when we think about social justice, the two key concepts that come up are the concepts of representation, which I think most of us are very familiar with. We talk about it at length. And the other is redistribution. So let's take a moment to reflect on representation, because there has been a lot of conversation about the completing of a century of the 19th Amendment in the US context. And what the 19th Amendment did, I mean, I've just been watching this series called Downton Abbey, where the protagonists in United Kingdom are talking about how US is now going to have voting rights for women, but the women in UK are yet to have it, and they are really disappointed with their government. So there's a moment in history when US is actually taking a lead and UK is lagging. Then that certainly is a moment of pride in terms of representation. But that said, it needs to be remembered that the 19th Amendment is not that one day that all women get representation with one ratified amendment. In fact, the women of color, particularly the African American women and the indigenous women, actually do not get the right to vote on the same day. And it is really only the white women who are being given the right to vote. And it takes a long struggle, and it's only really by 1962 that we have a much broader representation, if you will, where the women of color and the indigenous women are also regarded as equal citizens of United States of America, and they are therefore now given the right to both act as political citizens and also assert their civic rights. Quite in the same way, and I would also want to reflect that when India, which is the largest democracy of the world, in 1947, India becomes independent. And it is in 1950, about 10 years before US, that India writes a constitution and ratifies it, where they give both men and women the right to vote. Of course, it is learning from the global north that they realize that it is worthwhile to give the rights at the same time. But I want to point out that this is a work in progress. So it isn't like over, at one moment, the whole world has managed to get representation. And in fact, very recently, in 1993, India passes an affirmative action where they give women the right to exclusively stand for certain positions in particularly rural municipalities in India. And the reason for that is that India realizes, despite the political right to vote, women are not coming up in the leadership positions at the same rate as men are. And particularly in terms of local governance institutions, which is would be the parallel of county for us here, there was a lot of need for women's participation because that is really where the demand was coming from. And that's why the introduction of affirmative action in 1993, where women are given particular seats which would be specifically under quota, only be eligible for women to fight. And that certainly is also a moment of widening the representation. And of course, it's a joyful moment for US and for India that the Vice President, Ms. Kamala Harris, is today officiating, and it's certainly a moment of pride. You can't believe how many columns in Indian newspapers have been talking about how she visited so and so town, and so and so knew her, and we don't know if they really did, but everybody wants to claim a part of the fame. So it's a part of the ongoing conversation back home. So that certainly is, again, a very big moment in terms of representation. But with these, these waves of representation, and the first and the second and the third waves of feminism, a question that, stares at our faces is, what will we do with this representation? With these many number of women sitting on the tables of parliament and legislatures and governors' offices and lawyers guild. Of course, it is absolutely important to have women in all levels of governments, and I would say in all spheres of life. But that said, is just representation the end that we were looking for? Like Ms. Augustine just pointed out, I have since moved from political science to development studies, and now I look at an intersection of politics and sociology and economics. And as I am looking and studying those, I can see a huge concentration of women in what we call the informal economy. To give a brief overview, the informal economy is an economy where you basically hire people on either hourly wages or on very short contracts. You have no guaranteed pensions or health benefits or retirement benefits. And women seem to get concentrated in this specific part of the economy, particularly after 2008 recession. At this moment, when we're looking at the data, in South Asia, about 80% of the workforce, 80% of the workforce is women. In Africa, it's close to 60%, and in Caribbean, it's more than 50% are women, which means that women are invisible and they are missing from the conversation about whether it's wage parity or it is, honorable, dignified work, or it is about what should be the perks and health benefits and insurance, etc. There is also the resurgence of women who are, resurgence of domestic violence, which women are facing, which I think is perhaps one of the biggest obstacle in gender justice. On average, I just pulled up some statistics, 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience severe intimate partner physical violence. So, we have this representation, but we also have this ongoing crisis of the various structural and systematic ways of stopping women from speaking up. There are very systematic efforts to silence women and physically and mentally control what they are being able to do. And that is something that certainly takes away from the power of representation and needs some serious attention and conversations. The other thing that really concerns me was about the issue of climate justice. Women, particularly in global south, but also in global north, tend to do a lot of the work which is getting affected by climate change. If I can give you an example, there are women in parts of Africa and India who spend somewhere between 4 to 6 hours a day fetching clean drinking water for their families. And a lot of these girls actually are girls who are between the age of 8 and 13, and which means that they basically don't go to school and they use the time during the day to fetch water for the family. But with climate change and more droughts coming in different parts of the world, the time is getting added in terms of how much time they have to travel to get the water for the family, which is a huge burden for them. The loss of natural resources will in many ways really impede the power that women have. And the movements that we've made to progress in the last 100 years, I fear are being severely curtailed as natural resources are under attack. And it is linked to climate justice, of course. So with all of that, therefore, I want to argue that, while we've made some progress in representation, it's very important to think about how are we going to redistribute the responsibilities and the resources of the world around us? And it is perhaps time for us to bring up the second aspect of social justice, which is redistribution, and think about how do we make the society more accountable for women, and what do we do with those seats in the positions of power to redistribute for a better gender just society. Thank you.
Great, great. And one thing I enjoy about all of this, you mentioned several topics of climate and wage, work, all of these things are interconnected. So education is still a big issue. Can you elaborate on that in terms of access to education for women, whether it's in India or the studies that you've done?
Most certainly. So the studies that we are doing currently in the US, it's about Michigan, which is about the informal economy, like I just said. And we are specifically studying the effect that the pandemic has had on women. So we are, for instance, we have found multiple instances of women who came into the state as students, But then, because of the pressures of either child care or the pressures of having to make more money, they have given up on the university education or the higher education that they came in for. And now they are full-time nannies or full-time cleaners, but they're working in the informal economy. So when the pandemic hit, they had months of no income coming in, and they've been living on unemployment benefits. Thankfully, that's a real thing here. There are other parts of the world where you don't even have such a benefit. There are also instances where I myself have encountered a very smart, eligible woman, but she has had 3 children. And every time she's gone back after the birth of a child, her office has been more and more reluctant to take her back because she was not as committed, as they say, in her workplace. And eventually, after the 3rd child, she gives up her secretarial position and she becomes a full-time cleaner. She's also someone who's lost her employment during the pandemic because now with all her 3 children at home, there was no way she could step out to work. So, I don't know if we can call these choices because they are really stifling and really an obstacle more than a choice, where if you are a mother, it's not really a choice. You choose your children over everything. And I have a 2-5-year-old, and I know that's the most important thing. But so there are several of these cases which are coming up. But if you travel back to Africa and South Asia, where the relation between education and gender is a big issue. Of course, we have also unique cultural contexts where, for instance, puberty in certain societies is still an issue, and girls are advised to not step out because of a small thing like non-availability of sanitary napkins. And that is something that there's a lot of work being done to accept that this is a natural part of coping with how you can come out and be a part of the public sphere. But there's a huge dropout of girls between the age of 11 and 13 because they are not culturally allowed. But there is also an issue of feasibility in terms of, for instance, the water fetching exercise I was describing, or just the sheer fact that there are such few street lights between the school and the house. And by the time they get back, it gets dark. So it's extremely unsafe. So they are not being able to come back. To the fact that there are very many public schools which are fully functioning, but the quality of education is pretty poor, or the teachers are not very regular. And that also means that the girls find it very hard. In fact, only yesterday I heard this fascinating story from a friend who was telling me about this very poor family in a rural part of India, where the woman has 4 daughters, but only 1 school uniform among the 4 daughters. Mm-hmm. And therefore, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, each day a different girl goes to school because there's only 1 uniform. And it so happens that it's a moment of joy. One of the girls has really done well, and she's finished her high school, and she's joined an NGO as a field worker, which is like a social work kind of a thing. And she would now be working. So, they've reported the story and they're trying to write a longer piece on it. But, this is just a snippet of the kind of struggles people go through. They understand the importance of education, especially the mothers certainly do, that they understand this is the only way the daughters can break out of this cycle. But it's, there are so many resources and so many infrastructural obstacles that it's kind of hard to go around them.
Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta. And Ms. Johnson, to you as well, you have a great deal of experience, not only in education, but the intersectionality of education and policy. Can you also elaborate on education and representation as well as it relates to girls and women having access?
Yeah, absolutely. In education, it's really interesting, in the national context in the United States and certainly in Michigan, in almost every metric, women in education, girls are outperforming boys on educational attainment. Yet when you look at pay, that doesn't play out in terms of economic opportunity for girls and women in Michigan. So when you look at the high school graduation rates, the SAT scores, and now even college going and college graduation rates, we've hit a tipping point where across the board, our girls are far outperforming our boys. And so in education, is, significant opportunity. And I think that we should be really proud of that. Michigan's colleges and universities now produce far more women than men graduates. So what we're really focused on in terms of, well, and let me just say one other thing about education. One of the accomplishments of the governor's administration that I've been most proud to work on is a program called Michigan Reconnect, which provides a tuition-free pathway to an associate degree for all Michiganders age 25 and older. So if you're 25 and you do not yet possess an associate degree in Michigan, you can now apply for a scholarship that would provide a tuition-free pathway to an associate degree. Interestingly, when looking at the applications just launched about 7 weeks ago. So February 2nd is when individuals can now apply for the scholarship. Women are applying for this scholarship almost at a 7-to-3 ratio. So 70%, almost 70%, just so about 60, almost 69% of applications are women, and 30% of applications are men, which is really interesting. We know that many of the women that are applying are also mothers, and many of those are single mothers. And so there's certainly a desire to provide more economic opportunity for themselves and their families. And we know that there's certainly a lot of motivation there. In terms of equity, though, for women and girls in Michigan, when you look at the economy, it's not as rosy of a picture. Women earn 79 cents less for every dollar than their male counterparts while doing the same work. And for women of color, that gap is even wider. So we know we need pay equity, and Governor Whitmer's administration is committed to building economic security for women, which we know builds financial security for families and the overall economy. So I've been really blessed to work in this administration, and I think the governor has really is walking the walk and not just talking the talk. In her first month of office, she signed an executive directive to ensure pay equity for state employees. The governor's cabinet, as well as the executive office staff, I'm one of the members of the governor's executive staff, more than 2/3 of our cabinet and our staff are women, which has certainly never been the case. The governor has proposed funding for significant funding for a program called Healthy Moms, Healthy Babies, to ensure that women have the health care that they need to have healthy pregnancies. And to expand support for interventions that are proven to improve outcomes. In the budget recommendation this year, the governor once again proposed an exemption of sales tax for menstrual products, including tampons. And she's also proposed $370 million for the expansion of childcare options, which we know is a significant impediment for women participating fully in the economy. And I also wanted to mention the Michigan Women's Commission. Another thing that the governor has done is announced that the Michigan Women's Commission would move from the Department of Civil Rights to the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. So it could seem like a pretty bureaucratic shift, but it was quite intentional and really to focus and enhance our ability to address the economic issues that women are facing every day. So the Michigan Women's Commission is working every day to, again, break down barriers for women to fully participate in the economy, and childcare, paid parental leave is a huge part of that. Addressing those inequalities that prevent Michigan's women's financial freedom, like pay equity and salary transparency, et cetera. And then also to bring more diverse experiences and perspectives to the table through visible, authentic leadership of Michigan women. Like I said, we can, in the administration and in the cabinet, we are walking that walk by having such significant representation of women in our office and around our cabinet table, but we need to promote that more, particularly at the corporate level amongst Michigan businesses, and make sure that women are represented on corporate boards, on foundation boards, on nonprofit boards, and then encourage more women to run for elected office at all levels of government. We don't see that type of women representation, for example, in the state legislature or among mayoral candidates or county commissioners, et cetera, across the state.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. And we do have a question from the audience for both panelists. Both of you actually talked about economic disparity. So what are some ways we can achieve equal pay between women and men? And are there particular fields, in your opinion, that are doing better than others? And if so, why is that?
So one easy way that we can better achieve equal pay between women and men is not using previous salaries as the benchmark for future offers of employment. And so when asked, when you're filling out a job application, what did you get paid at your last job, and then using that to determine a job offer, that just institutionalizes the previous inequities that we've seen in terms of gender pay equity. And so that is just one example of a way that we can better achieve equal pay, is not continue to use previous systems of inequity to determine future levels of economic opportunity.
Great point.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, I think women also shy away from asking questions. We have, among various other inequalities, as Ms. Johnson just pointed out, we also have a huge issue of information asymmetry. And women, because we are expected to be more limited to private sphere and we ask less questions, we often don't have the required information when we go into negotiating. And I would say that, given social capital is such a big part of how you access information, women of color, I think, are particularly disadvantaged in this world of information asymmetry. So I think it's important, therefore, to reach out and ask, and there is no shame in asking. I mean, when I came in, I hardly knew what one can ask for a package, but I now know so much more in 5 years. So, and I would be happy to tell new people who are coming in that, this is what you can ask for. So I think that, that sense of community and those open questions can also make us more empowered in fighting the pay inequity issue that we are facing.
Great points, great points. So Ms. Johnson, this is a question for you from the audience. What has been one of the most challenging or obstacle this past year for you in the governor's office, and what has been the greatest lesson for you since you've been serving?
I guess the most challenging part over the last year is operating in what feels like emergency mode, and that's what this last year has been, right? This is the pandemic is a public health emergency, and operating in that gear of what sometimes feels like chaos or lack of control is difficult. In the early stages of the pandemic, and this wasn't just unique to me, but everyone that was working for the governor, it was kind of a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week type experience when we knew very, very little about this pandemic. Like everyone on this call, or at least Ellen and Shudi, is I'm a parent. I started the pandemic with a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and now have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it can be really challenging to balance this public policy work that has been very, very intense with parenting. So that has been certainly difficult, but I will say that, you know, the best part is just how inspired I've been by the governor's leadership, day in and day out. Her steadiness and her kind of constantly positive and productive attitude has made working for her truly, truly inspiring, even on the worst days. You know, when we all learned about some of the heinous acts that were planned on her life, her ability to stay calm and collective and positive and productive has been really inspiring for me, and I know the same is true of my colleagues.
This is a question for both panelists. What inspired both of you to work in public policy, and what has your journey been? Or do you have any points of entry into civic life?
Sure, I can start. You know, I've always been very, very interested in public policy. I can remember as a child being interested in reading newspapers and asking questions about current events. In college, I majored in political science because of my interest in politics. And I mentioned I interned in college and undergrad for the governor of Arizona, which was my first foray into state policy making, and kind of was really hooked at that point. After college, I was a Teach for America Corps member. I taught third grade in Las Vegas, and that's what really cemented my interest in going into education policy specifically. And that's what brought me to Michigan. I pursued a degree in public policy from U of M, and it was there that I first, or through that program, I got connected to Governor Granholm's office, and then have been working sort of in and around education policy, around education policy ever since. I am a first generation college going student. No one in my family had ever pursued post-secondary education at all. And so this issue of college access is really personal to me. And I know that no matter where I end up professionally, that it will be working on expanding educational opportunities for individuals, and particularly those that come from low income backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, I shared that passion. You know, I was interested in issues which involved people, and back in the days, similar to We the People, we used to have mock parliaments and a UN assembly, General Assembly. These were all in school, and I participated in them with passion. I did have an uncle, kind of a mentor, who really inspired me, who always encouraged me. You know, we all come from societies where too vocal a girl is not the most, you know, treasured thing. And I was a very, very vocal girl. I had an opinion about everything. And he's someone who always said, it's okay if you have too much of an opinion. And you know, one thing led to the other. I joined debating clubs. I went on to become the secretary of the debating club in my college, and in the university, Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is one of the best in India, if not the best. I also was very actively part of student politics. And through all these experiences, small and big, you know, from fighting for the issue of water in the dorms to fighting against the vice chancellor on the issue of you know, some teacher recruitment, all of that has made me feel that, you know, individuals are very, very connected to the society, and you need a community to be able to become who you are. And I think that has kept me rooted. So that's why I think I moved from political science to development studies, which requires much more work with communities and a lot of field work. In my PhD, I did almost 14 months of work with rural communities. And I have realized that there's so much that we don't know living in urban parts of the world. And there is so much that we need to learn from the rural parts of the world. And this passion of, theorizing, but also seeing people in it and connecting theory to practice is something that I've carried forward. I have worked for the Prime Minister's Rural Development Program in India, which was a central government program. It was an implementation that we were doing from a university. And I traveled very widely to very conflict-prone parts of India. But since I have moved into a more teaching role, but I continue to take students for field work from, James Madison. We do a lot of field-based work. We encourage students to do internships, which challenge them in terms of going into contexts which are not the most familiar. And we have students who go into Teach for America and other such programs which take them way away from home, but it really gives them a new perspective and helps them to root their classroom learnings in a broader perspective, I think. So yeah. I think all these experiences make people more rooted and better in the work that they do.
Thank you. As a first college generation student myself, I want to thank the both of you for all of the work that you've done. I mean, you've opened doors and created pathways for young girls and young adults. So what's your final, this is for the both of you, what's your final takeaway and word of encouragement? And what or tips and advice do you have for everyday people? Like, how can they contribute to this progress? Right? Because we understand that gender is not just an issue in corporate America, but even in our everyday lives. How can we educate our families? Right? Because the men that we're related to, they're part of the workforce too. They're the leaders as well. How can we create allies in our everyday lives?
Do you want to answer that first?
Sure, I can try. I think we, women need to be encouraged to speak up. I think, looking back, the one thing that has helped me, and I tell my female students all the time, that if somebody is speaking for 3 minutes, you don't need to finish up in 30 seconds. You don't need to free up time so that others can take it up. Please take your 3 minutes as well, if that's the time being allotted. So I think, a part of it is not just joining the conversation, but holding the attention of your audience and speaking your mind up. I think it just makes for a more diverse conversation. And the perspectives are, they enrich what comes out in, whether it's in terms of an assignment or a policy brief. I think we end up having better results when we have a more inclusive conversation. I also think that, now I can say it happily, I don't think obedience is the biggest virtue. So if you disagree on something, then you should ask questions. And that's true in classrooms, that's true in your friend circles, that's true in workplaces where you disagree with your superiors, because that's the only way to move forward. If you obey and you accept, then there is no way that a new path can be built. So, when I came to US, everybody had told me that I'll just be a mother and nothing more. But, that is not true. And, I think it is, of course, a bit part of it is luck and people who have found me, but a part of it is also that I didn't doubt myself. And I was aware there are structural constraints, but I pushed against it. So we should ask questions, and we should raise those doubts which are bothering us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've never been shy about speaking up. I've never been timid about asking questions. And I think generally I've just had a lot of self-confidence, which has carried me through a lot in terms of parts of my life when I was insecure as a first generation college going student. The way I got through college was asking a ton of questions. There's lots of things that don't come naturally to people that haven't experienced things kind of through their families, through osmosis, and marching myself to the registrar's office and having them explain to me what a withdraw meant on my transcript, or how to enroll you know, if enrolling in 10 credits instead of 12 credits would affect my financial aid package, like asking questions on the front end, and not being shy about it is really helpful. And then I do think leadership opportunities truly matter, and the way that you know, part of it is just signing up. So volunteering to be on the board of a nonprofit in your community, you know, considering running for local office like the local school board, or even bigger, just makes a huge difference. So sort of raising your hand for volunteer opportunities is not something that people should shy away from.
Awesome. Very, very inspiring. And I see we're getting short on time here. So what we're going to do at this moment before we end, we want to ask our panelists some fun questions. So it's like a rapid answer segment, just to get to know you, and for the audience to get to know you a little more. So
Fun.
first question, what's your favorite color?
Yellow.
Blue.
Okay. Favorite coffee shop beverage?
Okay, well, it's now my new favorite. It's brand new, but at Starbucks is like this brown sugar oat milk espresso drink that is unbelievably addictive. So it's just recently, I've just discovered it, and it's my new favorite.
I'm not a coffee person, but I love bubble tea, and I love all the bubbles more than the tea.
Good one. What's your favorite book? If you have any favorite books or book?
Well, my favorite book as a child, and it's just always stuck with me, is Charlotte's Web. And when I was a third grade teacher, I was able to read Charlotte's Web to my students. And when my own kids get a little bit older, I'm really excited to read it to them.
Good book.
Very tough one, but I think I really learned a lot from Things Fall Apart. It changed my world when I read that book as a 19-year-old. Yeah, so.
Oh. What's your favorite saying or quote? You have a favorite quote? It could be from you either. It doesn't have to be a famous quote.
I don't know who to attribute it to, but my favorite saying is, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I think it just speaks to progress, that even if we are not able to achieve an idealistic outcome, that taking a meaningful step forward is something that should be celebrated.
The quote that inspires me most, unfortunately, is in Bengali, which is my native language. It's Bishashe jogai bostu torke bohudur. It basically means arguments get us very far, but it's really faith which takes us the last bit.
Wow.
And it's from a very famous author called Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore.
Nice, nice. So what's your favorite season?
In Michigan, I'm born and raised in the desert of Phoenix, Arizona. So when I lived in the desert, my favorite season is spring. But in Michigan, my favorite season is the fall. I really love those like early September days when it starts to get a little cool. And I'm also a big football fan.
Nice.
For me in Michigan, it is spring, because I love the leaves coming back. But in India, it used to be monsoon, because we have a really long summer, 120 Fahrenheit. So when the rains come, it's like water relief. You can actually start going out and feel it. Yeah, so yeah.
Nice. If you had to pick one superpower, what would it be?
The power to hug.
Yeah, I mean, I think a time machine, like the ability to go back in time and speak to people in previous generations, or even just loved ones you've lost, would be pretty powerful.
Do you have a favorite song? Oh, yeah.
That would be really, I would have I have too many favorite songs, but I will say that I am named after the song Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, which my dad thinks is the best song of all time. And so I'm named after a song. And so when I hear the song Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, it does make me smile.
Yeah, I have also grown up with a lot of music. My father loves music, and I mean, growing up, he would play it from 4 a.m., which was very annoying. But now all those songs play in my head automatically, and I think it's a great treasure as I move away from home, which I've carried away from home. Music.
What's one thing that you're the most proud of in your career?
I mentioned Michigan Reconnect, which I think is a really transformative policy. It's maybe the policy or program that I am most proud of playing a small part in getting across the finish line. But in terms of my proudest accomplishment in my career, I think it was just when I was 27, when I had just turned 27 years old, I decided to just start my own nonprofit organization, period, and just found my own nonprofit. And so I, looking back and thinking, oh my gosh, all the things I didn't know. But I'm proud that I had, I guess, the tenacity to take a leap of faith and start something new, not knowing it was, if it was going to be successful or fail. So I guess I'm proud of the risk I took to start my own organization.
So I wrote my book, which came out in 2019, but I started working on it the year my son was born. And it was very overwhelming to write a book with Cambridge University Press. It was a long shot. I knew nothing about what I was signing up for, but the fact that I now have a healthy child and the book is out, when I look back, I think it was a good, two big tasks I took upon myself, and I seem to have survived, and they have survived with me.
So, well, that's the end of our rapid answer segment. I'm going to turn it over to Ellen. Thank you, panelists.
And thank you all for being here tonight. We are so appreciative to each one of you. You are vocal, you are inspiring, you ask the right questions, you make the right leaps of faith whenever you need to. And anybody who watches this will be richer for the experience, and it will certainly inspire people who watch it. So know that we are here and we are your champions as well at the Michigan Center for Civic Education. And we hope that this is just the beginning of even more conversations down the road. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, and thank you, Attorney Augustine, for being with us tonight. We are so grateful that you are here, and we look forward to more conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.